What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Just King podcast. I am one half of Just Joking Podcast King,
And I'm Joe.
and we are live today, streaming across multiple platforms. If you're looking for us, you can find us at the Just Joking Podcast on both YouTube and Facebook, or you can send us an email at just.joe.king.podcast at gmail.com. Today's format is going to be a little bit different from our normal live stream, our normal podcast that we have today, as Joe and I wanted to discuss the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade, the landmark Supreme Court 1970s decision in which the court ruled that the Constitution of the United States conferred the right to have an abortion. With us today is a special guest, somebody who I have known for a long time, that we wanted to bring her on to get her opinion and to also discuss with us because, I think different from Joe. Joe thinks different from her, but she also has a little bit of background and close to the ground knowledge of decisions in cases like this. So, without further ado, let's bring on good friend of the show, good friend of me personally, and just an awesome individual, Brooklyn Mosley.
Hey y'all, how are you guys doing?
Good. Glad to have you in the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brooklyn. So when I asked you to come on to talk about Roe versus Wade, what did you initially, think as far as how I talk?
Yes.
But being willing to come on and just kind of have this discussion with us.
Yeah,
What
I
was
would
your
say
initial
that I was a little bit apprehensive because I know that me and you go back and forth about a lot of issues. But I think ultimately, I think that it's really important to have these discussions because having these discussions is what's going to help people understand why this issue is a big deal for a lot of folks. And I think that it's always good to discuss topics with folks because I think as we talk about things, people can kind of get another perspective.
All right, awesome. And let's just jump right into it. What is Roe versus Wade? Can you go a little bit more into it for everybody?
So Roe v. Wade is a landmark decision that basically gave women the right to privacy. So it's centered around privacy, being able to make decisions privately with one's doctor and oneself. And so it's also kind of like a lot of case laws based off that precedent. So what it basically said before that, women historically, a lot of states outlawed abortion. And so women started to basically fight it because people were doing, like, if you heard the term back alley abortion, it used to be back in the day, people would have to go and seek out these services in less than reputable sources, less than reputable places. So even I have a great aunt who got a back alley abortion in the 1940s who could not have children after that. And so women were really kind of just like fed up. And so women started going through the process of through case law. And so there was a woman who's Jane Roe, who she sought out an abortion in Texas and she was unable to get that abortion. And so she decided to still go through the process of suing. So she did carry that child to term and that child was given up for adoption. I believe it was a little girl, but she still went through the process because she was like, this is BS. Like, I shouldn't have to do that. And so eventually, the Roe law got to the Supreme Court. And a funny thing about, not funny, but an interesting thing about that was at the time, the Supreme Court was 7 individuals. So the person who actually went to argue the case had to come back and re-argue the case in order to get it done. Once they got 9 justices on the Supreme Court, and then that became the law of the land. And it actually was at the time, when it became law of the land, it actually was a blip on the screen because that was actually the same day that Lyndon B. Johnson died, I believe. And so a lot of women who are now of childbearing years have only lived in a country where they were able to have full access to privacy in this country, even though we do have states that were making it very difficult, where, for instance, I live in Kansas. And the state to the east of me is Missouri. And so the way that they were able to make abortion more difficult was they had one single abortion clinic in the state, and that was based in St. Louis. And so, yeah, so Roe v. Wade was basically gave women the right to privacy and bodily autonomy and to choose when they are willing, when they're ready to bring a life into the world.
Okay. Hey, Joe, how about you, man? What's your knowledge of Roe v. Wade?
A lot less than that.
Same.
I understood it as the federal government, based off of the case, the federal government had the right to say that it was legal to happen, which prevented the states from saying it was illegal to happen, and that's honestly the breadth of my knowledge of it, because I'm a guy. It doesn't really affect me, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately in that my knowledge of it is limited based on the fact that it doesn't affect me, and
Okay.
Does affect you as a person if you're having
Yeah.
a family or you're
Right,
making a decision with a spouse or significant other.
Right.
So it doesn't.
And-
It impacts everyone.
No, but what I meant was prior to it being overturned, it never had. I never had to concern myself with, because I knew that my daughters were safe in that they had full access to anything that they needed, and my wife the same thing. So up until now, my limited knowledge was that it was legal federally for my family to have full access to any those kind of services. So I really don't like. I'm not like. I don't have like. She is incredibly knowledgeable about this whole thing, and for good reason, obviously. Um, but yeah, no, not great, but it's getting better.
Okay. So you, Brooklyn, came out and said that the person who was she was known as a legal pseudonym Jane Roe. Her name was Norma McCorvey. Now, I'm going to say some things that might get me canceled, but it is what it is. So, Norma McCorvey was married. All right. She had, prior to the third kid that she was seeking to have the abortion on, um, she became pregnant out of wedlock. All right. There are some people that, because of her behavior, said, well, they don't call it Roe versus Wade, they call it Ho versus Wade.
I've never heard that before.
Never heard that in my life.
I think you just made that up. To be
I
honest
feel
with
like
you.
I feel like that's a meme that came up just recently because because and society does this a lot, and it's whichever side is anti-abortion probably is that they'll come up with ways to make the person seem disreputable for no other reason than they feel that negates their argument.
Yep.
The court of public opinion is that if she's a hoe, in my opinion, then her entire argument, oh, she's just getting an abortion to get out of responsibility, that's irrelevant. She's legally allowed to, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And making her disreputable does nothing, because by our standards today, we have people in politics who are, I would say, equally disreputable. You know what I mean? Like doing whatever the fuck they want, and this was 1970s, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, is a completely different time. The standard was different. How women were perceived in society was awful still. Like, it wasn't, as good as it is now, and that's not even saying that much, truthfully. I feel like there's no reason that should be part of the discussion at all.
Let me make my stance clear. All right. And King is going to go on record and publicly say, I am for someone making the decision themselves on if they want to terminate a fetus. All right. That clear, period.
Yeah.
I do have some addendums to that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it does suck if I am the father of said fetus and I have no say in the lady's decision to terminate the fetus if health wasn't a factor in that decision. All right. Um, So I do want to make my viewpoints on where I stand as far as the as far as Roe versus Wade being overturned, and how I think some of the states have it right and some of the states have it wrong. So Brooklyn, like, being that this is kind of around your realm, your area, what's your take on the state's involvement in a decision like this?
So I personally think the state shouldn't have any involvement in the decision. I think that this is a decision that should be between a woman or a person who has the capacity to give birth, their doctor, and their deity. I think that these are very personal decisions. I think that things that what a person's body goes through when they go through pregnancy is not like a baby just slides out and then it's like I'm back up and at it, and a week later, like, these are like life-changing, body-altering experiences. And I think that no one who wants to go, if anyone doesn't want to go through that, we shouldn't be forcing that on them. So I'm very anti-forced birth. And so for me, I think that until the state is able to actually provide, like, we live in a country that doesn't even have paid parental leave, we don't have maternity leave, we don't have universal childcare. And so if a person does not want to give birth and then we make them give birth, we're really putting them out to the wolves. And so we live in a country that will have a person give birth, and then 2 weeks later, because we don't have paid maternity leave, they're going back to work. I have a friend who was a single woman who gave birth, and she basically worked until the day that she gave birth. I have another friend who she just had a baby, and she comes from a higher socioeconomic status because she's an attorney and her husband's a software engineer, and she got 6 months off, and that still felt like it wasn't enough for her. Like, I had to cheerleader her on and give her like a nice card saying you're doing a great job. So these are not like just simple things that happen to people. So I really think that these are very personal decisions, and they just deserve the privacy and space for someone to make it. So the state has no business giving someone, especially the states that have like the most strictest abortion laws, have some of the highest childhood poverty, which we should be uncomfortable with in this country.
I mean, we should. Yet at the same time, Brooklyn, you're having people, if I lay down with somebody who can reproductively have kids and have a kid, that was two people making a decision, that has impacts on not just our immediate selves, but the economy and everybody else around us. I think people are making dumbass decisions in life, and that's what's bothering me when it comes to topics and things like this. Because you can have somebody freely, out there have 10 abortions in their lifetime, and we're just, it's all right because it's their decision, it's their choice.
I feel like
Go ahead,
that's
Joe.
an I feel like that's an off the wall hypothetical. I mean, let's be honest, the odds of a person having 10 abortions in their lifetime are astronomically low.
Mm-hmm.
There's somebody out there doing it, sure, because statistically that's happening. So let me start off with my stance. Because saying you're for or against is oversimplifying it. There's so many nuances to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like abortions. I don't like them when people just make them because they made a mistake and they don't want to live with the repercussions. But I don't think anybody should have the right to tell them they can't. I think that is a decision they should freely be allowed to make. And it's tough because I'm a girl dad. I have 3 girls. And if any one of them made a mistake, which it's hard to call it that because you actively made the decision to have sex, and if you didn't protect yourself, or even if you did, the chances are it could still happen. That totally happened to me with my second daughter. We were using protection and everything and contraception, and my wife still got pregnant. And we weren't of the kind of mind where it wasn't an issue. We were married and we wanted to, have children one day. It just happened to happen before, we were ready for it. And we went with it. We rolled with it, and we're happy. So the option never occurred to us. I'm not really cool with the idea of it because I don't know what life is. Um, I know they say when life starts and all that shit, and that's fine scientifically. I understand it. I get it. Um, but that's not my call, and I don't think it should be the state's call either. I think that this is a country founded on the concepts of freedom, and if we're not regulating the bodies of men, we shouldn't be regulating the bodies of women. It's just it just shouldn't happen. That's what fucking world are we living in where we're telling people what they can do with their bodies in a country where we're entirely founded on the concepts and principles of freedom. Now we're a heavily flawed system because when we originally started, uh, African Americans, the black community was 3/5 of a person. So you know they were already fucked up when they started the whole thing, and women didn't even register as a human being in their original concept of what the country is. And people can say that's not true, but I mean, look at the fucking Constitution, man. It's almost entirely heavily slanted towards men as it's always been because that's society. I'm sorry, I'm going off the rails. I know I am.
Yeah, no, no worries.
I do it all the time.
No worries. I do want to go back on what you said about you and your wife having felt birth control and then you all being able to decide that you guys wanted to keep the
we had that choice.
to give birth to the baby. And so this was all about choice. So when I think about Roe versus Wade, it's bigger than abortion. It is about bodily autonomy. If you brought up the history of this country. So back in the 1800s, states didn't start banning abortions until like the 1820s, and then slowly more states banned abortion. But abortion was always available to white women. And like historically, even when abortion becomes harder, women of means who tend to be white will always have access to abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, I would not have access to abortion because I was property, and that's property damage. So I am stimulating the economy. So it's about bodily autonomy because historically, so many people in this country, especially people who look like me, have not had bodily autonomy. When I think about the privacy and the choice, I think about the fact that like I have a cousin who came out as very anti-choice, and I was very shocked by that because historically, her and her husband have 5 children together. By the time they had their 3rd child, they were actually not financially stable, but no one told them that they could not have more children. That's bodily autonomy. That's being able to say that I want to have more children, so I'm going to continue to have more children. There is a time where women who look like me were forced sterilized. And so that's a problem. So when I think about bodily autonomy and I think about choice, it's the choice to either parent, it's the choice to either give birth, it's a choice to not give birth. It's a choice to not be a parent because back in the slavery days, I didn't have the choice to not be a parent. So it's more than just abortion. It's about the whole infrastructure of what it is to be a person who has the capacity to give birth in this country.
I think the biggest problem is the stances people are taking, the reasons people are giving, and ultimately they have no right or say in the grand scheme of things. They have no real right to say whether someone else should be allowed to do something. You know what I mean? They're not, and it's tough because that's why they make it a law so they can say you're breaking a law. But it drives me insane because I know this might go against some of y'all's beliefs, but they use the Bible for it all the time, and it drives me nuts because I'm not atheist, but I'm definitely not the religious type, and I definitely don't think a book written 2,000 years ago should be governing what we do today. Although it can help guide you, I guess, you know what I mean, with the positives of it, but using that archaic way of thinking in 2022 when we're constantly talking about countries that still have inhumane treatment of women, and yet we're doing something so similar at the same time, like talking out of one side of your neck and then doing something else. You know what I mean? Like I don't think America really has taken a look in the mirror and said, "Oh shit, we're doing exactly what we hate about places like the Middle East, for example." Um, and that's not to say the whole Middle East is bad, but what I mean is there's human rights issues with women in those countries, and we're doing the same thing, and then calling them uncivilized and us doing the same thing, but we're civilized. We're America. We're the paragons of righteousness and good. And go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying that the West played a huge role in like a lot of the decline in Southwest Asia and Central Asia. So if you look at, I encourage everyone to look up women in Afghanistan in the 1960s and 70s, and then look up women in Iran in the 1960s and 70s. They look very much like the pictures you see of your grandparents or your parents growing up. And so I think that what you're looking at in America when people lean into the Bible and try to make laws off of the Bible, what you're looking at is the decline into theocracy. And once you get theocracy really upholds certain standards that are just not good for women. And so
it's not good for anybody who's not
it's not
in power.
good for anyone. Yeah. It's not good for anyone. And like the average person who, even if you think that you're a boss, like you are not going to be a boss in that system. And a lot of systems of oppression eventually hurts everyone.
Yes. If you're not in power.
If you're not the one in power, it's like it's a lot more fun to be the dictator than it is to be the dictated, essentially. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I know from our time in the military, learning about the history of these countries like Iran. Iran, like you said, in the 70s looked a lot like New York almost. Just they women were allowed to dress a certain way. And what happened was you had these hard right conservative types of another culture and another religion. So I'm not going to talk on that. But it's essentially the same concept. It's the same thing. You have a bunch of people living a certain way and a bunch of older people from another perspective saying you're living the wrong way. You should live the way I think you should live. And the government's giving in. And what's going to happen is it's going to continue to escalate in that direction if we don't fight back, if we don't stop them. And that goes across the entirety of what we are as a culture. And it starts here. It starts with marginalizing women, stopping them from having bodily autonomy, and then it goes into other things. And I've made this argument before. This is a form of terrorism. And let me play it out for you. Let me explain. What's the number one rule of the government when they talk about terrorism? King, what's the number one rule?
I don't know what you mean. I guess my number one rule, how I perceive it, is something that instills fear or strikes fear.
No. The number one rule of the U.S. government is we don't negotiate with terrorists.
We don't
negotiate with terrorists. And why? Because the minute you give into one of their demands,
it'll have a domino effect.
It escalates. They push harder and they go further every single time. And this is the same concept. It's the same concept. You're giving one demographic of people what they want. And what's going to happen is it empowers them to go further and farther. And eventually it leads us into a theocracy. Because this one demographic of people is getting what they want, and it empowers them to feel that they deserve more. Now, the inverse can be said that if you give in to the other side, we're just going to go further into degeneracy. And that's their argument on the opposite side of the thing. But that's not truthful. It's not the case. It's not honest. If we sat down and we were honest with each other, I think we could see that giving women bodily autonomy it shouldn't even be a thought. It should be a thing. We should just have freedom to control ourselves. Like, I'm going to go off the rails. You guys got to rein me in.
All right. Keep going. Go.
No, I mean, she would have a better perspective on this whole thing. I'm angry at us. Like, I don't think America is really paying attention to itself. We have these arguments that it should only be The good argument is that it needs to happen. It protects people. It's a human right. It's a God given right um, to make those choices and to have those things. And then the opposite is that their promiscuity gets called into question, or they're doing it 10 times, like you said earlier. Like those kind of false narratives we create in our mind
Mm-hmm.
because we don't like it and we don't agree with it. Like, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, but it's none of my goddamn business. I have no right to tell. So if my daughters, when they get older, whatever happens, if they decide they want to keep it, that's their decision. I'm not going to force them one way or another. If they decide they don't want to keep it, I will give them the resources that they require either way. Either I'll help them or I'll help them. Like, that's the thing. Like, that should be how we function and operate. What happens when a man has erectile dysfunction in this country?
They get
Their
Viagra
medical
in the
their
middle.
medical, yeah, and their medical insurance will cover it. Why? What is
Because
it
it's
about? Think about it. Like, think about how that was built into this country. And think about the population that benefited from it the most at the very beginning of it. Tell me what you think of when you think about that kind of scenario. Who do you think benefited the most from that? Because I can tell you who wasn't taking Viagra. You know what I mean? Like,
hmm.
I know my culture wasn't taking Viagra. And I'm not going to say which culture I think was, but I can tell you which demographic was. The very, very wealthy initially. Because the poor aren't saying, how can I fix this? The poor are trying to live their life and trying to do what they have to do. So the rich decided we needed this and it needed to be covered because my penis is very important to me and it should be covered by my medical insurance. Think about that. Think about that. Like, people don't think about that shit. They're not thinking about that.
Ah,
How important the penis is to the man that he actually got Viagra put into his medical insurance so he didn't have to come out of pocket for it. And yet we're talking about giving women contraception?
I didn't. You actually raised a good point that to something that I was going to try to argue and defend
Yeah.
later in the stream, but actually the way that you just stated that killed everything that I was gonna bring up. That's actually, damn, man, that's a fantastic point, brother.
And that's the thing is somebody on the opposite side of the argument will roll their eyes and say it's not the same thing. But it
Mm,
is. It's about
it is.
bodily it's
It
about
is.
bodily control and autonomy. And if we're in a country where they're willing to say that men shouldn't go with flaccid penises, they should be allowed to use their penis whenever they want to. Just pop a pill and your penis is good. But we're telling a woman she can't decide whether to keep or not keep a child. And then specifically with the states that are passing these laws that make it completely illegal 100% across the board, now we're talking about health concerns. You know what I mean? Yeah, and there we go. And there's the map of the restricted places. And honestly, most of the restricted places don't surprise me.
And these are some of the poorest states in the country. So
Mhm.
if you look at like Kentucky has some restrictive abortion. I think the poorest county in the country, and I think most of some of the top 10 poorest counties in the country actually reside in are in Kentucky. And so, yeah, like it's like one of those things that you look at states that have more means, there's like is less restrictive. States
Yeah.
that have more education is less restrictive. States that have really good numbers when it comes to childhood poverty rates and children who are going hungry are the states that have the least restrictions on abortion. And just to kind of go back to a point that you brought up, it's also like one of my I took feminist political theory when I was at the University of Kansas, and one of the books that I was introduced to was The Girls Who Went Away, and it's about what America looked like pre-Roe v. Wade, and it's about and a common theme about it was, for one, this country did not really talk about comprehensive sex education.
Mhm.
Contraception was not available. And then also, if you go on top of that, a lot of the women in the young ladies in the book they didn't understand consent. So you talk about like, oh, someone's really irresponsible. If you don't talk to someone about their own body, sexual education, and like what they want, like teaching them how to, like, if you don't want this to happen to you, then like how to say no and all those good things. So it's more than just like irresponsibility, because you look at states like I think, for instance, like in Texas, they got rid of comprehensive sex education, and there was like a county that had like the numbers for sexual transmitted diseases went up amongst
skyrocketing
because they did not understand it. And so it's bigger than just like, oh, someone was irresponsible. If someone doesn't know, because like the same people were like, I want to get rid of abortion. They also don't want to give sex education. They don't want to give people access to contraception. And it's way bigger. And going back to the book that I read, it was like a story. One of the women who was talking about her experience, a lot of times when it's like a teenage, I think when a teenager is pregnant, the average age of the male who gets them pregnant is like between the ages of 20 and 29. Like, that's a stat, my guy. Like, you should be in jail.
Scary.
So these people are not, these young people are not getting pregnant by their own counterparts. They're
not their peers.
Predatory older people. So it's a little bit more complicated than someone's irresponsible. And then there's so many ramifications that come along with it. A woman who is able, or a person who's able to give birth, who can delay their delay parenthood by a year, their earning power goes up by 10% just by delaying having a child for a year. Their access to education and finishing their degree goes up. Like their percentage of them going and finishing their degree goes up tremendously. So it's not just like irresponsible people. It's like, it's fucking men. Like, it's men being predators towards young people.
So
in these cases.
So he's shaking his head no, but let me tell you, I was in high school and junior high school in the 90s in New York City, and I knew 16, 15-year-old girls dating 20-year-old guys.
Same.
And at the time, I didn't understand that that was wrong.
Yep.
And yeah, it should be common sense, but you're not wise enough to understand that. You know what I mean? You don't have the emotional intelligence to understand that is a big fucking issue.
Especially when you're 15, like a 5-year gap when you're like, 30, like that's no big deal.
That's different.
But, like, think about you at 15 and think about like someone's life experience at 20.
At 20, yeah.
And that's a huge difference. That person is a
big
loser.
Predatory problem.
It's a loser.
And the way that King thinks about it is that it stemmed from that cycle of bad choices, because I'm looking at it this way. Now, I'm looking at it from my bubble as a father, that if my daughter came to me and said that she had a decision and it resulted in her, getting pregnant at 15 from somebody that was a lot older than I feel. For me, I had one child for a reason. I knew I could only afford one kid. I knew that, I only wanted to be responsible, for one kid. But when you have these people that are out here having 5, 6 kids out of wedlock, letting Pookie, Ray, and whoever,
Stop.
I said it.
Those hypotheticals are going to get you every time.
It leads to this cycle where
unless you can give us exact scenarios of people who have done these things, you can't use hypotheticals to do a logical argument. I love you. You're one of my favorite people in the world, and I know you to be one of the most logical people I know, but you're using hypotheticals.
But the observations are there.
So idiocracy was true about a great many things when it comes to reproduction in this country. It feels like the poor tend to make less intelligent decisions, but that's not true. They have less access to the same things the wealthier have. And it's easy for the wealthy to think they're stupid. They're not. They're incredibly intelligent people, just like everybody else. Loads of people make stupid decisions all the time. Look, dude, you can't tell me you didn't make 1,000 dumb decisions in your lifetime.
And if you say you did, I'm going to call you out. I've publicly across several of my platforms have came out and said I've made a lot of idiotic choices in my lifetime. So imagine if you like, you have to
However,
live with your decision. Like,
Yes.
imagine every single person that you've slept with out of wedlock. Because I know that, and if you say you haven't, I know you're lying. Because I've known you for 20 years. So every single person, every time that you had sex with someone, you were at risk of being ostracized and judged by society based off of stuff that you're saying right now. So just imagine that. So if men had to go through that, or people who have the capacity to get someone pregnant had to go through that, we like to quote my favorite show, Veep, we'll be able to get abortions at an ATM, basically, because of the fact that it impacts the people who are in power.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just the difference between you and someone who has the capacity to give birth is that you are the person who you may not see your consequences. You may not have to deal with the decision of your consequences unless you get burned. That's different.
Or legally, I fathered 10 kids. All 10 of the moms take me to court, which they legally can do, to where now, let's say I didn't want to be financially responsible for those 10 kids. The court's now going to tell me, oh, you are, and, garnish my shit, regardless of whether,
First of all, our society is really horrible at garnishing wages for child support. So
that's not true.
Our society
they take my money.
Well, I'm sorry for you guys, but like a lot of states are really not equipped to actually like collect child support from men.
Yeah.
My point to that though is that there is a repercussion to me having those type of actions.
Like financial repercussions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like fiscal responsibilities.
Yeah. That financial repercussions. So let me just like explain to you like the difference between financial repercussions and then social responsibility. So for instance, you could be someone who, if you decide to have 10 children with 10 different people and you have to provide, let's say you have the means to cover all of them. What you're doing is you are subjecting someone who is a parent of your child to have to now get a bigger space. So like now, like a lot of times, like child support doesn't even cover the cost of an additional room that you have to get for an apartment or a townhome or wherever you're living. When that child gets sick, if you're not a parent who's there, who's the person who has to leave work so they lost wages to go and pick up the child? It is the parent who is the primary caregiver, which a lot of that responsibility actually falls onto the woman in the situation or the person who gave birth to the child. And so you
don't say it's not true.
You say it's not true. So it is very much true. Like I have a friend right now who she's a single parent, and if she wasn't a single parent, her salary would be a really good salary for where she lives. But because she is a single parent, her salary is just okay. And like, there's a lot of things that she has to delay. There's a lot of things that she is unable to do because of the fact that she is a primary caregiver for a child. When her child got sick, she was the one that had to take time off of work. Not the kings of the situation. It was the parent, is the primary caregiver.
Why not?
You got to understand, that's their dynamic. See, you're coming from the perspective that you're responsible, your spouse was responsible, you guys had a child together, you made a decision as a couple. Mm-hmm. You know what you would do doesn't mean it's what everybody else does. And again, you got to talk about which level of income is the person that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, so what's your? Go ahead. Go ahead. Speak.
I mean, in that same vein, I'm not the primary. Like, I have joint custody, but the primary is her mom. And in that same vein, my earning capacities as well, even though I'm not primary because of, certain situations and things. And me having to make decisions on what I choose to do and live because of, being a single parent, essentially,
But you're not a single parent.
You're not a single parent, though. You're a co-parent. And I'm going to go back to you mentioning your child, your daughter. I don't know if you say her name on this podcast, so I won't say her name. But your child, your child is in a relationship, has a relationship with her parents that she is able to talk to you basically about anything. I know your ex, and I think she's great. And so you guys, and they have an open dialogue. I know that you probably have an open dialogue with your daughter. And so that circumstance is very different than a lot of people who find themselves in this situation. So for instance, there's people right now, and I'm pretty sure we all know people that we went to high school with who were those latchkey kids who did not have parents at home that they can go and talk to, who were basically raised by the quote unquote streets, because of the fact that they didn't have those things. And so they didn't have the same capacity that your child has. So using your child as the example is probably not like really the best example, because of the fact that I know that you're a good parent, and I know that your ex is a good parent. And I know that your child has a lot of adults in her life that care about her, that will help her get steered in the right direction. And I'm pretty sure that if your child came up to you and said, hey, Pops, or whatever the fuck she calls you, I want to get birth control because I just want to get birth control, that you can have a real conversation with them and like give her the consequences, the benefits of getting it, and you guys can make an informed decision together. So I think that you guys are that's a different situation.
That's my argument, though. My argument is that I'm sitting on the side of somebody that's making or attempting to make an informed, responsible decision because of understanding what the consequences and stuff are. I despise people that say that, with the way things are, that people don't have the knowledge to, understand this stuff, when I think that, most households have one of these, sitting in there, a majority of households, whether they're wealthy or not, along with, I almost said something that would have got me canceled. Along with other stuff that they have going on, and things that, they can be a part of, have, access to cell phones, but they're choosing,
you gotta understand,
to go out there and go to the bars, and, have unprotected sex.
So those are two different
and
things.
Then want to blame other people's actions for their choices.
They're not blaming other people's actions. That's the thing.
This is why we argue all the time. This is why we argue so much, because
well, he and I have definitely done this several times too. So there's two different arguments there. Having access to information and being able to understand what you have in front of you is a very different thing. Having the emotional intelligence to even understand what life would have been like without a child, to have the foresight to know that they could have made that decision and their life would have been dramatically different, for positive or negative. Because you could argue that the kid that you have is meaningful and you love them and they're great in your life, but what would your life have been without them? You know what I mean? Like it's complicated, because obviously once you have the perspective of the child existing and being in your life, you can't argue what life was like before them. But some of these people don't have the means to sustain that life. Yes. And more importantly, the government isn't going to help them. And how many times have you or other people, myself included, I get caught up in it sometimes, have looked down on the people who live on the resources that the government gives them to help them survive in those situations. Whereas I came from one of those households. My family was on food stamps. We stood in line for free food. Some people reproduce because the concept of not being able to make a choice not to isn't there. And it doesn't matter that they have a cell phone. There's no ads in on TV saying that you can get an abortion today. And if that did happen, I guarantee motherfuckers' minds would explode. Be like, oh my God, they're pandering abortions to my children. You know what I mean? And that's not the case. It's informing people and letting them know that these services exist because you might need them. And for whatever decision you decide to make, that's not your call or my call, that it's the wrong decision. You get where I'm coming from? Like, you don't have to agree with it. It just has to be. It's that kind of thing. It's that kind of thing. It's like, I can't tell you how to breathe. That's insulting. If I tell you, you breathe too heavy, man, stop that. This is how you breathe. Look, like this. Like this. No, stop. Breathe like this. No, you're breathing like a heathen. Stop it. Breathe like this. And only my way of breathing is the correct way to breathe. Every other breathing technique that you use is wrong. and it's against the Bible and you're going to go to hell. And I don't care if you have asthma, you're going to breathe the way I tell you to. Oh, the asthma is going to kill you? Oh, you know what? I know people who have 5 asthma attacks a day, and you know what? They live with it. Think about that kind of argument. Think about that for a second. Like, people aren't connecting those kind of things. These things can kill people. These things can ruin lives. And it's not like the government is like, we're going to help you with your child for the next 20 years. And governments that do, Americans are like, no, we're not going to be socialist. God, not my country. You know what I mean? Like, those social programs don't really exist in this country that kind of way that we can say, have all the children you want, and we're going to stop you if you try to get rid of them. You know what I mean?
And I'm going to go into like some of the structural issues that we have when people are unable to make decisions about like if someone is forced to give birth and they do not have the means to provide birth. So we currently live in a country where about 1 in 5 children live below the poverty line. So that's roughly about 13 million children in this country don't know where their next meal is going to come from. Does everyone remember when the pandemic first started and they shut down schools? What was one of the biggest concerns that came out of that pandemic? Meals.
How are these kids going to eat?
How are these kids going to eat?
Yep.
And so there's some kids right now that the only good meal that they're going to get is the free breakfast and the free lunch they get. And those are not even like really good meals. Like those are just meals to sustain them.
During the pandemic, our schools were still giving those meals out to those families because those families relied on that.
My youngest sister worked at Harvesters, which was, she no longer works there. She lives in the DMV area now, but she worked at Harvesters, which serviced 26 counties that went as far west as Fort Riley, Kansas, and went as far east as Central Missouri. And one of the things that I used to volunteer there, and one of the things that we would do as volunteering was doing back snacks. So what back snacks was it's basically you pack meals for kids to take home in a backpack to take home with them so that they don't go hungry over the weekend. And the meals were really kind of like, it was very clear these are like meals and snacks for the whole family. It's not just for the kids. So we have kids who are living under who live in childhood poverty. Another big thing that came up, who remembers another big thing that came up during the pandemic that was a structural issue that we had?
Like supply chain issues?
Lack of childcare.
Oh,
How many parents found themselves in a situation where they did not have childcare? So we have all these structural issues that already currently exist. I currently live in a town that does not have any public preschool. You have to go to the Montessori school, and I think it costs about $800 that's the one you get education. The other daycares are just like your kids are playing with blocks, but if you want your kid to get an education, it's a little bit more expensive. The average person, it's expensive. And so there's all of these structural things that we have not solved for because this country does not care much for people who are not of means, that now we're going to like make that explode. And then you have to think about the mental health that comes around when you cannot provide and you cannot survive with just yourself. And now you have this additional life. We actually saw the numbers of people who sought abortions or who gave their children away drop with the stimulus check because people needed needed that initial investment to be able to like buy a crib and buy these things. And so people decided to keep their babies. So we live in a country where we are not providing any resources for people. There's countries right now that if someone gets pregnant, they get 6 months off and they're paid to take that time off. Right now, if someone takes 6 months off, like I mentioned, my friend who has means, she's an attorney, her husband's a software engineer. She literally went unpaid for a couple of those months that she took 6 months off, but she was able to afford to do that because she had someone who is in her household who was a high income earner that allowed her to do so. And they also shut down student loan payments. And so she had a little bit additional money in her pockets. And so there's just a lot of things that go, it's more complex than just, are you bringing a life into the world? When you bring a life into the world, does that structure exist for you to be able to be a good parent and be a supported parent. Because I'm going to let you know, it is very lonely, especially if you are a single parent. Especially if you're a single parent in this country, to try to survive. There's very little resources. I know people talk about food stamps, but I think food stamps is like $5 per day per person. Try to feed someone on $5 a day, 3 meals during the summertime.
Yeah.
That means you're not getting high quality foods, which also goes into, if a child is hungry, they cannot learn. If a child does not feel safe at home, they cannot learn. If a child is neglected, or if they're neglected or they're not like loved and they don't have adults in their life that care for them, they are going to grow up, and some of them are going to make it. There's always those stories of those children that make it. And so I'm not saying like, oh, let's just make sure that no poor people can have children, but we also need to think about what is the structure that exists currently, and does that structure support parents? Because I'm going to let you know it does not.
I think ironically too, when people think of this argument for abortion or for pro-life, think about the hypothetical you said earlier, right? You said a name, and then you said that they had 10 kids. You remember that? They were having 10 abortions or whatever, or having 10 kids with lots of people.
Mm-hmm.
In your argument, you were implying a specific demographic. And I honestly feel like that when a lot of these people make these pro-life arguments, they have that same image in their head that these marginalized communities are overbreeding and overpopulating, or not. They're the ones who are doing that. You know what I mean?
They're irresponsible. That's what. Yeah.
Yeah, because they have less resources available to them already. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like,
I actually had a name for each demographic, but y'all stopped me, man, before I could list them all.
I'm happy we stopped you. I'm happy we stopped you, because I'm happy.
But I did find this interesting, because without looking it up, okay, it's hard to look for stats based off of like abortions by gender, because of how it's reported, as well as, you know, people could have an abortion but not have it in the U.S. or have it in a state that chooses to, you know, put that kind of data out there.
There's no way where that data exists.
Yep,
because it's a privacy issue, and I mean, man.
But looking at one now, I let me say, I'm not going to. The validity of these stats can be questioned by anybody, but the Guttmacher Institute has been, in my opinion, pretty diligent about compiling, you know, data essentially, and then reporting on the data that they're getting. So I was a bit surprised at not necessarily the income of the abortion patients, but the race. In what they had listed here.
Doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me. So more white women get abortions, but those other races, because they're a smaller percentage of the population, actually get abortions at a higher rate. So Black and brown women get abortion at a higher rate because I think Black women make up about 6% of the population, while Latinas make up about like 7 or 8% of the population. I think they're a faster growing number. And so you're looking at, so that's an aggregate number. So, but if you broke it down by the rate, it would not be surprising.
Yeah. And again, the numbers are the way that they are. And the poor and low income is so high because they have less resources and education available to them. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're poor. They're poor and have less resources available to them. That's why they end up in the scenarios that they end up in, because they haven't been educated. And honestly, the people who are saying they should not be allowed to have these services aren't also saying they should be educated better, or we should put more money into their school systems. Because let me tell you, the difference between the kind of schools that I went to in New York City in the 90s compared to the way the schools are here in Maryland, in a wealthy location, the resources are staggeringly different. I mean, it's a different time. It's a different generation, decades apart. But I guarantee the schools in Maryland here look this way reasonably within reason for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And the schools in New York in some of the lower income areas, I guarantee, are still exactly the same as they were in the 90s. And I know that because nobody gives a shit about us in those neighborhoods. And
And
people can argue.
I don't know about you, but like I went to a high school that had a daycare.
Okay.
And I don't know if any of you guys went to a high school.
Wow.
I went to a high school that had a daycare in it.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, we had a child development center in my high school. So it had a daycare, and they had the daycare buses too, where the girls who had children got on a different bus that had car seats on it.
What?
Hey, so
what was the demographics? What was the demographics of your school?
So my school was, I think the demographics was like it was like a very small white population, but then it was mostly black and brown.
Wow.
Yeah, so we had 3 high schools in my district, and I think all of the high schools had childcare in the district, but like the one that was like the wealthier high school in the district probably didn't. And but we had daycare in my high school. We just had enough girls, because one of the town that was the high school was located in was a very like socially economically depressed town.
And yet parents for the last 20, 30 years have fought against sex education in school. Yeah. Clearly you're not teaching your kids the fucking right thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, for example, prime example. 2006, 2007-ish. I had just gotten back from Iraq for a couple years, and I got stationed in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama.
Oh, and God bless you.
It was actually not bad, because I mostly stayed on base. I didn't really go out from base. I had the wonderful job of teaching health and wellness to young, new servicemen and women, and prior service as well. In the Army, some Marines. And they asked us to provide that training because, honestly, it should have been a part of everyone's in processing. How to take care of yourself. You'd be amazed at how many of them didn't know basic life health stuff. What resources were available to them as adults, and the kind of things they could do to help themselves while also serving in the military. And at some point, there was an outbreak in the barracks of ringworm.
Yeah.
Ringworm as a sexually transmitted disease. It wasn't being transmitted because of, training or anything like that. It was being transmitted through sexual activity. And we knew that because we could track the trends, and we knew through we would actually do tracing even back then. They asked us to give courses on sexual education. And me and a coworker of mine, we put together a wonderful slide deck, which I still own, by the way, because it's both graphic and informative. But what was important was these 19 and 20-year-old kids did not understand the basic principles of sexually transmitted illnesses and how to properly stay safe, or that they could make the decision without the other person being willing to make the decision. Because a lot of guys are like, I don't want to use a condom. I don't want to use a condom. I don't like the way it feels. Fuck the way it feels. And this is why this can happen to you. You know what I mean? And that saw a dramatic decrease in sexually transmitted diseases within that small garrison. But it had to be done almost every month. Like, people are always saying, like, us military are always like, why do we got to do these fucking stupid trainings? Why are we always in training? Because motherfuckers don't know, or can't be relied upon to make the responsible. What's this?
That was me saying, or they're making dumbass decisions.
Yes, exactly. It wouldn't be a rule, and it wouldn't be a thing if it wasn't a thing. And that's the kind of shit that happens. And I mean, but now you got to understand where that comes from. That small demographic of American of our country who serves in the military. Small, condensed demographic, but they come from us. They represent what the country is. And it's a sign and it's symbolic of the lack of education for our kids. I don't have to like that schools teach sex ed, but it needs to happen because there's parents out there who aren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be something where they don't want to. It might be their kids are latchkey kids. Their parents are working. Look at society right now. Almost nobody can do single income these days. Almost nobody. Because cost of living is enormous. Houses cost a fucking fortune. Everybody's got school debt. There's just a million and one things that require you to work, which gives you less time to take care of your family. And let's be honest, society is bombarding them. Like you said earlier, they have access to all of it. All of it. At every minute of the day. And it is bombarding your children with misinformation, disinformation, and lies. Outright blatant lies. And how do you combat that when you don't have the time?
And then I'll also sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say
also go ahead. No.
I was going to say it's not like people are pushing sex education over the internet. And if they did, people would be like, stop showing that shit to my children. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we're throwing resources at people. And if we did, like the inverse, if we did, people would be like, would shut it down. Yeah.
And I want to add also, like, even though children and people have access to a lot of information, a lot of individuals do not have the discernment to find credible sources. And so, I get a chance to deal with people a lot who say, oh, I got it off of YouTube, or I learned this. I read this somewhere. It's like, did you get that from a TikTok? Because it sounds like you got that from a TikTok. And so we actually have a situation, and I used to work in like veteran employment services. And one thing that I really realized was like a lot of individuals, like there's just so much information out there that it's just white noise at a certain point for individuals. And so a lot of times people get overwhelmed with the amount of information that is out there as well. So unless someone like knows how to discern between like what is a reputable source, and then also like they have someone else to ask like additional questions, like you're just not going to like, if you don't have a parent at home that you can say like, oh, I read this somewhere, then you're just not going to be able, like, you can read the information, but if you're like a kid or a teenager, you might not understand the information or may not have the understanding to actually take that information and do something with it.
Okay. All right. So let me present this, and then we will wrap up today's podcast. So, Brooklyn, if I'm understanding you right, all right, after everything that we've talked about, it is your opinion, and don't let me put words in your mouth. Correct me as you always do. It is your opinion that neither federal nor state should have a say in the decision of a person's reproductive status, rights, essentially. Like, if I was somebody who wanted an abortion, I should be able to make the healthcare decision myself to go and have the procedure performed without anybody telling me what I can and can't do.
The state's responsibility in this situation is to make sure that someone goes into a safe environment when they do it. So regulating abortion clinics like you'll regulate a dentist office. Like, you don't want to get your teeth cleaned at a place that's gross. You wouldn't want to get surgery in a place that is unsafe. And so the state has the duty to regulate the people who are performing it in a way that it is safe for everyone, but like not putting undue burdens on clinics and individuals. And bodily autonomy is between you, your deity, and your doctor. That is the synopsis of what I'm saying.
Okay. So, all right. With Roe v. Wade being overturned, what do y'all foresee in the immediate future and in the long term future? How us as a society is going to look at doing what's best for the people?
I'll go first. So I think initially you may see it's like a lot of states actually have archaic laws on the books that with the fall of Roe, you're going to see a lot of you've already see like places close up clinic, especially in the states where people can afford it the least and they don't have the means to be able to freely travel to their nearest state. So what you're going to see is a lot of undue burden. I will say that if a woman's able to or a person's able to give birth, is able to get there's a pill that you can get, and so the longer you wait to get an abortion, the more complicated it gets. So if it's hard, so what you're going to see initially is that you're going to see people seeking out later abortions because they have to come up with the funds to travel to a different state, to get a hotel, to do the waiting periods, and all the barriers to getting abortion that has been established. So I think initially you're going to see people having to travel further. I think that you're going to see individuals trying to find home remedies, but like as of now, there are safe options out there. There's options for the pill that you can take to get an abortion. So what you're going to see initially is going to be people having to travel farther. You're going to see individuals seeking alternatives to going to a clinic. But I think that what I'm hoping to see is that people are going to be able to mobilize and organize in their states to make sure that they have full access, because women vote at higher rates, and people who have the capacity to give birth vote at higher rates than men. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of a backlash from it.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more of a cynic. I'm worried about the people who feel empowered to go back to picketing in front of the clinics where they're still legally allowed to, and hurting the doctors and the people who need help. I fear that we're going to backslide to that time when they would murder doctors, because we're pro-life. I always found that to be just a tad ironic. Um, like I worry about the cost to the people who are living in this situation. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be medical scenarios where this is going to be a problem. There's going to be non-medical scenarios where this is going to be a problem, because everybody always goes to the, well, rapes and incest are a small thing. They're not. I mean, they're a massive thing, because you can't look at them as statistics. These are people living in situations that are awful. You have people who are living in situations that will kill them. And it's not about the number. It's about that it's happening. Like, that's the thing. We get so caught up in the 1%. 1% of 13 million is still a lot of fucking people.
Mm-hmm.
And the part that really disappoints me about this country is we went into this whole pandemic issue where, more people die from the flu than they've died from COVID. I'm sorry. So now we're just okay with people dying? I mean, I thought we're here to keep people alive. Like, that's what we're doing. We're here to live and to help people live. That's freedom. You know what I mean? To take care of each other and help each other and love each other. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Wasn't that the foundation of what we're doing here? The American experiment is taking an odd turn right now. And the thing about it that's so disappointing is everybody who's standing on the pulpit and the parapets and the fucking towers and standing on all of these elevated platforms so people can very clearly hear them, they're not talking about life. They're talking about what Hollywood has taught them, what memes tell them, what these fucking articles that are completely false narratives and hypotheticals that just live in their head or exist in their echo chambers. And it's going to do more harm than good. So they've won this moment, and unfortunately, I think that's gonna empower them to do more, or I
Yes.
should say, take more.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a state thing. I don't think it's a federal thing. I think it's a right, for lack of a better word, a God given right. Whatever God it is that you subscribe to, it is it is a part of existing. It is a part of existing, and people don't have to like it. Nobody has to like it. A few years ago, they didn't like gay people getting married. A few years ago, they didn't like women voting. A few years ago, they didn't think people had the right to be considered people. And those things changed. And it was painful to the people who didn't like it at first. But slowly, they came to realize that it was wrong. We just went backwards on that. How does that happen? How does that happen? You get where I'm coming from? Like, and I think honestly, do you want me to tell you how we speak to America? We get a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl, we put her on TV, and we tell her, "What if I was going to die from not getting an abortion?" And honestly, I feel like people be like, "Ooh, she looks like my daughter. I care now." You know what I mean? It makes me feel something, you know? But you got these people in these demographics who are honestly, most of them beyond birthing age, saying that it's wrong. I would never allow this to happen. And that's a fucking lie. Because rich people will make a baby disappear in a heartbeat. In a fucking heartbeat. The lie that Hollywood sells everybody that it's just the poor black Hispanic communities that are doing this are also the same Hollywood who shows you that rich couple who takes their daughter's baby and pretends it's theirs, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Or just sends her off somewhere to give the baby and then give it up and just fucking dump the baby somewhere. You know what I mean? You want to talk about hypotheticals? Hollywood has given us a million hypotheticals that tell me white people make that shit work. And the rest of us are fucking stuck in whatever future they decide for us. And I hate to make it about that, but our country's literally telling us how they feel with the things that they say and do, you know? And people can hate me for it. People can say I'm racist. Dude, I look white. I get away with people thinking I'm white 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And unfortunately, I fucking roll with that. But it's also given me the perspective from both sides of the argument here, you know? So I worry that this is going to cost it's going to take more from us than we actually understand. And I think once that cost is fully realized, maybe we might make some progress again. And it's unfortunate. I think the people who are fighting the good fight need to continue, but I think it's going to take a body count for people to really truly pay attention. I feel like that's how we learn in this country, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Hey, Joe, man, I appreciate your outlook. Brooklyn, as always, a BK, I appreciate you as well. Brooklyn, do you have any recommendations on where people can get some more information? Oh, I think
I
Brooklyn
think we
might
lost
have
her.
frozen. Yeah. Let me let her know. Let me let her know that she's frozen. So, hey, y'all, while we look to see what has happened with Brooklyn, I'd like to thank Brooklyn for coming on
Yeah,
board.
yeah,
I don't want to reveal what she does, but she is very informative with what she was going to be coming on today
yeah.
and talking with us, which is why I wanted to bring her on. Um, but I'm going to see if we can get her back here and actually Joe, tell the people about our podcast real quick while I go and see if I can get Brooklyn back on.
So you can find our podcast pretty much everywhere. Oh no, the light went away. So we're on pretty much every major streaming location right now, and you can find us on Facebook and YouTube at the Just Joe-King podcast. And we hope you come back. We hope you tune in. And if you have any comments, anything you want to say, anything you want to ask, anything we think we should include, things we should change, like me getting a fucking light for this room, shoot us a message, hit us up, leave a comment, drop a like, put a thumbs up. You know what I mean? And if you don't like it, fucking tell us you don't like it. You know what I mean? This is a free country. Say what you want to say within reason, because we don't want to come across as a monster, right? And I'm not saying you can't say what you want. I'm saying be responsible with what you say, because what you say can get you caught up. Like, people are going to judge us off of everything we said today. And
Basically.
that's fine. And that's fine. And they may never tune in. They may try to get us taken down, and that's fine, because that's what America is. It's the freedom to say, I don't like what I'm hearing. It's not going to stop people from doing those things and saying what they have to say, because I also have the freedom and the right to do so. And that's what I think we need to come back and understand. Just because I have rights, it doesn't take away your rights in any way. You don't have to listen to us. So you don't have to hear what we have to say. And you don't have to agree with any of it. Or you can agree with some. Or you can agree with all. That's how this works. And that's how it will continue to function if we can come together and understand that we don't have to all agree. But we also should not take away what people are allowed to do. Because the minute you take away something, it means you can take away more things. And that it goes for everything. I mean, marijuana is legal now. Not fully, but it is. But yesterday, it was not. And we put lots of people in prison for it. People want to take away your guns. They probably shouldn't, because guns keep you safe when used properly and appropriately. And so in this case, it's a similar situation. You're taking away somebody's bodily autonomy. You're taking away their right to make a choice about their life. And that's unfair. And if somebody took away something you loved, or something you needed, or something that you relied upon, or hindered your safety or well-being in any way, you would do whatever it takes to stop them from doing that. I think we should all remember that just a little bit. And maybe at least we can have a conversation about this before we start making life or death situations or decisions. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Hey, Joe, I'd like to thank you for that, man. That was actually, as you were talking about some things, it kind of got me spurned on some ideas and some topics that I'd like for us to have in the future. I've been chatting with Brooklyn. She was having some network issues. I do
Yeah.
not believe she's going to be able to make it back, and we need to close out the show. So, just
Yeah.
like Joe has said, you can find us on the Just Joking podcast on both YouTube and Facebook. If you want to shoot us an email, hit us up at just.joe.king.podcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts about what we discussed today, or Roe versus Wade, or the Roe versus Wade being overturned in general, put it in the comment section. Share your thoughts and let us know what you think. And if you support what we're doing over here, even just hit us with the like button on either platform would be fantastic. Joe, it's been fun. It's been real. I need to stop by and see you, because man, it has been a while,
Yeah.
and I'm not just gonna talk. I'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Until next time, brother, and to everybody else out there, peace.
Peace.